Thank you all. Welcome to our groundbreaking of the Flatwater Free Press. This is a groundbreaking where you don't need a hard hat or a shovel. It's a very unique one, goes along with the pretty unique opportunity we have here. Flatwater Free Press will be public service journalism for Nebraskans. Thank you for sharing your time and interest to learn about this exciting project. I am Lynn Roper from Lincoln. I'm board chair of the Nebraska Journalism Trust, and that is our corporate name. I'm thrilled that Nebraska citizens are going to have access to in-depth, engaging, high-impact, quality journalism through this new news outlet. Joining me on our inaugural board are Joe Giles of Omaha, who's currently executive director of the Omaha Women's Fund, and Kent Warnke of Norfolk, longtime editor of the Norfolk Daily News, and John Gale, former Secretary of State in Nebraska. And I think Joe's with us today. Joe, you want to say a few words about your involvement in our mission here?
Thank you, Lynn. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this inaugural effort in Nebraska. It's so needed. Some of you may know some of my background here in Nebraska. I moved to Nebraska 17 years ago to be a journalist, a broadcast journalist at the KPTM Fox 42 News. And I think, some of us that are involved in this project who have journalism in our hearts and in our blood, we're drawn to this field for the reasons that Nebraska Journalism Trust will exist. Many of us wanted to tell those stories that are investigatory in nature and really hold government and elected officials accountable, and also finding those unique and special and warm aspects of our community that are positive and that we want to share and highlight. And as many of us have seen the journalism industry change, and I know Matt and Matthew will talk about this a little later, as it's changed over the years, resources have shrunk, newsroom sizes have shrunk, and reporters have often not had the opportunity to cover those really impactful stories. And that is what this effort is aiming to do. And I'm just so thrilled to be a part of it, to be able to share that love of journalism and how important those stories are going to be for our state. And it's a wonderful project, and I know you all will enjoy and support it.
Thanks, Joe. Now, our program today, you will hear from Matt Wynn and Matthew Hanson of Omaha, two very dedicated, talented, and experienced Nebraska journalists who will lead the Flatwater Free Press. You'll also hear from Jim Friedlich, who is in Philadelphia with the Lenfest Institute, and he will talk about nonprofit journalism and his experiences. And please know that throughout you can use the chat box to write your questions or use the Q&A. We will leave time at the end for Q&A. We want to give you the information, respect your time, and hopefully you'll be able to stay for the Q&A, but know that some folks always aren't, and we will get your information. Also, we'll give you sources about how to find out more. So Matt Wynn, you want to talk about Flatwater Free Press?
Yeah, thanks so much, Lynn. And wow, I legitimately got chills hearing Joe talk about why we're doing this and kind of the high-minded ideas. Thanks to everyone for coming here to hear about what we think is the next needed chapter for Nebraska journalism. I know a lot of the names that I saw, but my name is Matt Wynn. I am, for another week, an editor on the investigative team at USA Today. I oversee 7 journalists. We work on projects that seek to, highlight bad systems, that highlight bad actors, that try to change laws, all that sort of heady, big J journalism stuff. Prior to that, I was the director of investigative enterprise at an outfit called MedPage Day in New York. And before that, I was a reporter at the World Herald. I spent 6 years there. I thought I'd spend a career there, but here we are. I wanted to show a slide that I think really demonstrates why we're here today, why we're embarking on this project, and why it's so important. We all have seen this happening. We've all seen our newspapers shrink. We've seen the depth of coverage become more shallow, but this really brings it to a head. The idea for this was really planted kind of at that first inflection point, about 2008 there, where you can see that media publishing fell off a cliff here in Nebraska. That was really a turning point for this industry. And there was an idea born at that time for a nonprofit newsroom. Investigative work, people realized, takes time, it takes resources, and those were increasingly unavailable in our traditional newsrooms. So the idea was born to create a nonprofit model. Nonprofit aligns very well with the goals and intentions of investigative journalism. Foundations, philanthropists, that world is interested in making a community better. And that's why I got into this business. That's why Matthew got into this. That's why all of us got into this from the beginning. We want to make the world a better place. So the idea that we've pitched is the Flatwater Free Press. The Flatwater Free Press is a small team. The beauty of being last in line, Nebraska is, there are 300 nonprofit newsrooms around the country, 330, I think, last I saw. Nebraska has one. It covers North Omaha. The opportunity here is to do it in a statewide way, to try and cover all our communities, tell all our stories to each other. What we're pitching is a small staff, an executive director, an editor, 2 or 3 investigative reporters, and a strong freelance budget. Matthew will talk a little bit about how that works in practice. We will have our own website, Flatwater Free Press. We also have an organizational website, as Lynn mentioned. The corporate name is the Nebraska Journalism Trust. Our content will go on our website. It will go out in a newsletter. It will also be freely available to all media across the state. We are partnering with everyone. The Nebraska Press Association is on board. They will distribute our content to all their 120 members in the state, weekly, daily newspapers. News Channel Nebraska, Mike Flood's outfit, is on board. We've had several conversations about how we're going to work to ensure our stories get told to the largest audience. Radio, TV, ethnic newspapers, everyone is on board and looking forward to cooperating here. The idea is that we are going to augment what Nebraska's journalism does and does fairly well. Block and tackle journalism is still alive and kicking here. If there's a car accident, you'll hear about it, a shooting, a crime, no problem, that's covered. What we need is the deeper systemic issues and to talk about our successes as a people, as Nebraskans. That's where we want to focus. That's the work we want to do. I can feel myself getting rolling, and I can certainly fill up an hour by myself, but I won't do that. We are honored to have Jim here today, and I will just pass it to him and let him tell us a little bit more about this world.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? I just want to do a quick sound check. Lynn, I shared a moment ago that my family is from the Midwest. I'm coming to you from the East Coast, but my father and his parents and their parents grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. I didn't mention he was in the advertising and media business himself, and one of his advertising clients was called Dorsey Laboratories from Lincoln, Nebraska. So Lincoln, Nebraska literally put me through college. And so thank you. I'm Jim Friedlich, and I run a nonprofit foundation called the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. We're a national foundation, and we're focused on saving and supporting and advancing local journalism all across the country. We have a particular focus on our hometown, which is Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We own the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is the flagship in our city. It's the largest newspaper in America operated under nonprofit ownership. So we believe in nonprofit journalism, and we believe in the Flatwater Free Press for that reason. The reason we believe in it is severalfold. The first is that it really works. We've seen the Texas Tribune, which is the nonprofit in Austin, Texas, Cal Matters in Sacramento, Vermont Digger in Montpelier, our own startup in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, covering the full Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, called Spotlight PA. Spotlight PA now has 17 people and also 15 foundations that support it and individual memberships of about 5,000. And it's proof that in one state, a wide variety of people, big and small, big foundations like the Heinz Endowment, all the way down to individual $5 a year givers, support local journalism. And we're widely supported from the right, from the left, from progressives, from conservatives, because as as Matt has outlined and as Matt Hanson will, I think, also support, this is nonpartisan, objective, independent journalism. It supports everything we hold dear. We cover economic justice, racial equity, transparency in government, probably our biggest single focus. And it really works. It changes policy, it changes lives, and we see it as an important civic good. Jerry Lenfest, who started the Lenfest Institute, was a cable mogul, and he sold his business to Comcast, and he dedicated himself to philanthropy. And he liked to say that if you support the art museum, the orchestra, the opera, the school system, Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania, you should support your local newspaper. So he turned it into a philanthropy. For lots of economic and secular reasons, local news has become a philanthropy, and it's very much worth supporting. I think very highly of Matt Wynn, of the time I've spent with him. He's a terrific investigative reporter, a terrific storyteller. My sense of Flatwater Free Press is that it will be both hard-hitting and accountability oriented, but also tell the story of Nebraskans across the state. It'll collaborate and not compete with the rest of the media and be additive to the overall ecosystem. So for all those reasons, I'm here as an advocate for nonprofit journalism, but a particular supporter of Flatwater Free Press. We'll do anything we can, including trying to help fund and pledging to this effort and offering any kind of advice that we can. So it's a way to give back to Nebraska and to this wonderful field. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jim. And yeah, we paid for your college. It's the least you could do, right? Yeah, that really gets to the heart of it. And it's so good to hear you say how you've already seen it work and kind of the promise that this holds for Nebraska. I'm going to introduce Matthew Hanson, who is the person that we're trusting to put this into effect. I can't speak highly enough about Matthew. He is a friend. He is also the best journalist I've ever worked with. And I'm glad that we've been able to put him in a position to do what he does for Nebraskans once again.
Thanks, Matt. In way back in the olden days, in the Omaha World Herald newsroom, I think the year was around 2010, another younger reporter and I sat in adjoining cubicles, and we talked a lot about the future of journalism. That was a scary conversation even in 2010, but what wasn't scary about it was we started brainstorming, scheming ideas about ways that we could help to try to change the arc of that future in some way. The reporter in that adjoining cubicle was my fellow Matt Wynn. And I am so honored that after he worked on this project for a couple of years, he hired me to run the journalistic efforts as the editor of the Flatwater Free Press. I'm very excited to get started. So let's talk a little bit about that journalistic vision. And I want to start with what we won't do. And you already heard this mentioned a little bit, but we're not going to be a Husker football practice. We probably won't be at the city council or school board meeting, at least not everyone. We're not going to cover the murder down the street, no daily crime news, no car wrecks, no clickbait. And for sure as heck, we're not going to pay any attention to American celebrities or the royal family. As Matt already mentioned, most of that stuff is actually very important, not the celebrity stuff, but the rest of it. But we have journalism today in Nebraska that still does that work pretty well. I mean, another way to think about it is like, there are people tending the topsoil, that first level of stuff in Nebraska journalism. What we want to do is go deeper. So how do we plan to do that? Our tagline is important stories well told. And I love that tagline in part because I have an ego and I thought of it, but also because I think it accurately captures in 4 words, the two-headed monster that we're trying to build here. Track 1, we're going to hire and unleash talented investigative reporters inside the state of Nebraska. I'm sorry, Charlene. It's important stories well told. That is the tagline. So yeah, track one, hire dog investigating reporters and unleash them in Nebraska. That sounds a little scary when I say it. It's not. It's this idea of, okay, if we've got the topsoil taken care of, what about what lies below? What's the subsoil? What's the bedrock? And in Nebraska, and if you look at Lynn's painting behind her, it's the Ogallala Aquifer. It's the largest source of groundwater in the world, or one of them. That's where we want to go as in journalism. We want to deal with the systemic problems and systems level change. So that's track one. Track two is we are going to locate and empower, and we've already started doing this, talented freelance writers to write stories from all over the state of Nebraska. These stories will be the sort of stories that show us in all our nuance, our confusion, our complications, our hypocrisies, our mysteries, our imperfect glory. They're stories by Nebraskans, about Nebraskans, for Nebraskans, stories that show us what it means to be Nebraskan. Now, because I'm a cynical reporter, if I was sitting here and listening to a person say all the things that I just said, I would wonder, well, that sounds great. What are you actually going to do? And so I wanted to end by offering a couple specific examples of at least what I'm thinking about. But what it means to be Nebraskan stories, I did a lot of those during my time at the World Herald. I just wanted to offer two examples. One, a story about two young friends who decided to get up at 4 a.m. each day, drive to the outskirts of their town, which is O'Neill, Nebraska, and together before the sun rose, they started buffing, molding, chopping copper into these really high-end artisanal copper mugs that they started to sell all over the world. The story of this company, Handlebit, and it's a story that I've written a couple times, is a story about old-fashioned Nebraska hard work. And it's also a story about the Renaissance of O'Neill, Nebraska. And it's also a story about how in a small town in Nebraska in 2021, you can make a product and market it all over the globe. Another small town story, the story of some allegedly mistreated horses inside a tiny town in the Sandhills called Seneca. The fight over those mistreated horses became a fight on the town council about what to do about those mistreated horses, which became a fight about the existence of the town itself. And on election day a few years ago, the residents of Seneca, Nebraska, drove to their local polling place and by a single vote voted themselves out of existence as a town. That's a story about a small town fight. It's also in some interesting way a national story about modern day America. Projects, so that's maybe some of the feature story ideas. Projects, if we had been in existence in the last year, you can damn well be sure that we would have written a lot about COVID, about communities affected by COVID, about the policies related to COVID, and obviously we'll probably focus some on the after effects of COVID as the vaccine rollout continues to happen. Need an environmental crisis inside a small town. When did the government know? What did they know? Why wasn't it stopped immediately? These sort of questions. The state prison system, the state budget, how the state budget has changed over decades and what that says about our values as Nebraskans. That's the sort of stuff we want to hit on projects. And we want to do it in a way that this young reporter, Matt and Wynn, and I tried to do it when we did our first project together as reporters. The project was about a North Omaha neighborhood that had once been the murder capital of all of Nebraska, and a decade or so later didn't register a single murder in the span of a calendar year. So what happened? Matt and I dug into the why. We came up with all sorts of nuanced development and policing and neighborhood pride reasons. But then when we told the story, it wasn't meant to be some dry recitation of facts. I'm not interested in the dry recitation of facts. We try to make that story come alive through the faces and the voices of the people who lived in that neighborhood. I spent a day with the grandmother who'd lived there for 50 years. We went to neighborhood community meetings, and we interviewed the local pastor, the local liquor store owner. And so we didn't end up telling their story. They ended up telling their story through us. That's how we're going to practice journalism, the Flatwater Free Press. And as you can hopefully tell, I'm so excited to get started. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I mean, hearing you talk, this happens every time we are so excited to do this work, and we are excited to put it into practice. But I want to tell you a little bit more about how we're going to get there. We have, as Matthew said, we've been working on this for years. I've been working on this for years. We got a gracious grant from the White's Family Foundation to put together a feasibility study. And Vic Gutman and Associates actually did that work for us. We talked to stakeholders around the state, probably many of you, folks you know, to talk about the need, the stories that need to be told, how this could work, what it would take to get there. The result of that was solid. We spoke with a lot of people who do this in similar states. So we spoke to Wyophile in Wyoming. We spoke to South Dakota. We talked to Wisconsin. We talked to Oklahoma. And we learned that this is viable, sustainable, and meaningful and doable. We can do this. This is something that can happen here in Nebraska. We took that work, we wrote some grants, and we've been able to put together a little over $1 million to get this a shot right now. Our goal is to raise another $1 million, which would sustain us for about 3 years all told. We have a matching grant from the White's Family Foundation, Sherwood, Logier. The Nebraska Community Foundation is a sponsor, as is the Platt Institute. And then the Good Words Foundation out of New York and the Mammal Family Foundation are also on board. We're actively putting out new grants. We are looking for supporters. That's kind of where we are now. That's been tabled as we focused on the journalism. We have enough that we're able to focus on that. So I want to talk about that just briefly. We have kind of an ideal of 4 types of stories that will be the Flatwater Free Press. The first bucket is statewide issues that resonate border to border. Think about, again, prisons, environmental things, things that every Nebraskan can look at and feel invested. They affect all of us equally. Part 2 is stories that are about either Omaha or Lincoln. I think it'd be a fool's errand to claim to cover a state and ignore the 2 largest metros. By the same token, bucket 3, stories that are specifically not in Omaha or Lincoln. I think there is so much promise. Those communities, they do great work, but the stories have not been told to Nebraska at large. We've kind of lived in we've siloed. And it's been really sad to see as a Nebraskan, as a lifelong resident, right? And then the last bit is undercover communities. I think that's our undercovered, underserved communities, our Native population, immigrants, Black and Latino populations across the state. We want to make a special effort to tell those stories again to Nebraskans at large. And the idea is we will look at our coverage at the end of every year and see how well we did in achieving kind of an equal mix of those 4 types of stories. I do have one more slide that I want to show you here that I really think gets to the promise of what we're talking about. Nebraska for years has had something that I think we've all witnessed, right? We have all seen this happening. Lancaster, Sarpy, Douglas County, kind of our urban areas, move to the left, slowly but surely. Sometimes they weave back and forth, but by and large, the trend line is they move to the left. The rest of the state has moved farther and farther to the right. We aren't talking to each other. Our stories aren't being told to each other. That's the promise. This is about connectivity, binding ourselves based on our humanity and what we have in common. I think the 2 types of stories that we're talking about, local investigations and these human stories, what they have in common is that they exist in this gap between these 2 lines. I don't care who you voted for in 2016 and 2020. You can agree that the story of 2 friends waking up at 4 a.m. to make copper mugs that start the revival of a small town in Nebraska, that purchase a building and create a makerspace, that's cool. Everyone can agree that is important and meaningful. And there are a million stories like that across our state. I don't care, again, who you vote for president, who you back in your Senate race. You know that the state prison system, freeing prisoners before they're legally obligated, but not giving them the benefit of parole, is a miscarriage of justice. All of us can agree on those things, and that's the promise. That's the high-minded value of what we're talking about, and why I get so excited about putting into effect what we intend to do.
I'll go ahead and sort of wrap this up, and please put your questions in the chat. But as you can see, our goal is to create a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom dedicated to thorough, investigative, fact-driven journalism, to dig deep, examine significant issues throughout our whole state. Our funding goal is a broad base of support. We have learned from other examples across the country. One of the things about being late to this party is that we have a lot of best practices and experience to draw upon. And probably half of the funding will come from foundations, and then founders, individual sponsors, and eventually individual memberships. That we have funding in hand and a matching grant out there to continue working is very comforting and will allow this enterprise to launch. I think the tagline, important stories well told, is the goal. I think you all understand that mission. I asked you to go to our website, which at the time is nebraskajournalismtrust.org. Register there because that's where we'll put updates, and we'll begin telling you where we are in the timeline to launch publication. If you'll sign up there, you'll get all the information that we have about it. But we appreciate the time. Hey, we actually got it done in 28 minutes. We were aiming for 30. And now we'll open it up for Q&A and be happy to respond if you have questions.
Yeah.
I'm looking, Shane and the rest of us.
We have one very nice question to answer, which is what can we do to help? I could answer that just journalistically real quick. What you can do to help is we're going to have mechanisms by which you suggest story ideas in both these buckets that I talked about earlier. Please, traditionally, I think reporters have the reputation, sometimes well-deserved, of being not interested in outside viewpoints on things like story ideas. We are intentionally going to be very interested in that. So as that gets set up, please suggest things in your community that you think are uncovered or the story hasn't been told well.
Yeah, I would back that up. We're super eager to hear these stories. I think one of the benefits of this model is, and I didn't really talk about this, but our cadence is slower, right? We are not reacting to news, really. We're able to kind of set the agenda. With a story or two a week, we're able to pick and choose our spots and make sure that they matter. So we're intently interested. And honestly, some of the most exciting days I've had on this project are when I talk to people who need something covered, who see something that deserves to be told. Another question we have here is, how are we going to ensure independence from major funders? Look, the idea there is membership. We want to increase our funding. We are blessed to have the sponsors that we have, and they've given us the shot in the arm to get this off the ground. But we do intend to be membership supported, similar to the NPR model or others like that. And the idea is our readers, our members, will tell us when we're off base, and we answer to them. We also do have kind of a firewall set up. Donors give to the Nebraska Journalism Trust. The Nebraska Journalism Trust has a board, and then there's editorial independence for the Flatwater Free Press underneath that. This is something that's happened across the country, and we think that we can weather that storm with aplomb. If I can
jump in for a moment, Matt, I think one of the fears in launching nonprofit journalism was exactly as described. Corporate underwriting is a different flavor of the same ice cream, and it's been remarkable how independent the journalism has remained, and also how sophisticated the donors have been. We literally never had a conversation at Spotlight PA or the nonprofit owner of the Philadelphia Inquirer about calling us on the carpet about a particular story from a major foundation. The bias is sometimes that the Pittsburgh Foundation obviously wants us to cover Pittsburgh, and the Philadelphia Foundation Philadelphia. And there are some grants that are specifically about economic justice or environmental coverage, but those are all things that we want to cover anyway. And I think you have the benefit of a sophisticated philanthropic sector who often, frankly, want spotlight shown on these issues and are less comfortable doing it themselves. It's easier for the Flatwater Free Press to expose a problem in a given city than, say, the Community Foundation, even though the Community Foundation is a bigger supporter of is a big supporter of yours. So it's turned out not to be a problem, which is kind of a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for jumping in there. That's great to hear. And I do think, I mean, talking about the role of foundations versus the press, right? They are focused on, oftentimes they're focused on solving very concrete problems. This person does not have food, right? Where we're able to look at the systemic roles that put them in that position in the first place. It's kind of a complementary sort of thing. Charlene asks, when do we hope to start publishing? Matthew and I start July 1st. We will immediately go to a daunting laundry list of things that we need to take care of, including hiring staff. Our hope is to get them in the door by September 1st, and then we can start publishing kind of those larger investigative pieces. The full-time staff is all investigative. We do have a hefty, comfortable freelance budget with the intent of telling the stories of communities around the state. And those we might be able to start a little sooner. Jim asks, how will we measure our impact? Which is a great question. We don't want to do it with traditional means. Page views have become the currency of our traditional newsrooms, for better and worse, right? I think we've all made the mistake of, the most successful story in world health history is about a dad who accidentally ate some pot brownies and filed a police report. That is not what we are going to do. So it's about kind of heady things, right? One of our metrics is convening community conversation. We want people to, and we mean that quite literally. We want people involved, invested. Our membership, whether people feel that they see value in this, is more meaningful than how many clicks a particular story got. The amount of time people spend with the story is more meaningful than how many people clicked on it. If 10 readers are there and they read the whole thing, they're there for 10, 15 minutes, that means far more to us than 3,000 people clicking a thing and being there for 30 seconds. But the larger, more direct answer is our performance indicators are to be determined. We know that impact matters more than clicks. That's kind of our mantra. Design and graphics, Carol, great question. We have contracted with a design shop that's in the middle of building our website. And they, the beauty of them is these are people that we've worked with before. Both Matthew and I, they understand our strengths and weaknesses, and a major weakness is design and graphics. So they're building that into the plan. There will be ways that we can kind of quickly create infographics or those sorts of things. Our photos will have a certain style. Things that will lower the bar for entry for Matthew and I so we don't stub our toe. We also do plan to involve those in the freelance world, right? We're talking with a photographer in a couple of weeks that we intend to make a regular contributor, and we're on the hunt for those folks as well.
Yeah, that's another way that you guys can help everybody on this call. If you have a suggestion for a person that either with journalism training or honestly without, that you think can represent some type of what we're talking about when we talk about feature stories, for sure, send one of us an email and suggest a potential freelancer.
We do have one more question here about why are we making these stories free for other publications? I think that gets right to our mission as a nonprofit newsroom. We are about community betterment. We are about Nebraska at its best. And the way that we get there is by working with our peers here in media. We saw the chart, right? They have suffered, and we want to help them plug that void. They are hungry for content. We are hungry for quality content. That's a match made in heaven. They're natural partners, and we think that makes sense.
We've gotten the press conference question at both of the info sessions so far now.
Do you want to take that one, Matthew? I
want you to answer.
Yeah.
Well, you need to read it. If it's only to the panelists. The question is, do we plan to attend Governor Ricketts' press conference? In other words, apply for credentials. Definitely that will get us publicity. And you've gotten good advice on this.
Yeah, Matthew and I met with the World Herald editors last week. And they told us they really want us to apply. So we will. I don't see any reason not to. We will have to disclose all our funding, and that's fine. Transparency is one of our core values. We believe in doing that, and I don't think we have anything to apologize for. We have purposely created both a board and a funding model that is across the political spectrum, across the geographic spectrum. Everyone has skin in the game. If we fail to deliver on any part of what we're promising here, we're going to pay for it quite literally. So I think our board is a mix of Republicans and Democrats. Our funding is a mix of Republican and Democrat and largely nonpartisan sources. And we'll see what they say. We don't, the other beauty to that is it's not like we're going to live and die based on whether we're allowed to attend press conferences. One of our content decisions is someone else covering this? And by definition, when you go to a press conference, the answer is yes. Sometimes that's a nice opportunity. There's an old kind of journalist trick that if someone's dodging your calls, like a governor, you can show up at the press conference and they won't have the ability to do it in person. So that might be a nice move to have in our back pocket. But by and large, we don't care what they're saying. That someone else is already handling that. The division of labor already exists.
I went entire months and probably almost entire years of my career at the Journal Star in the World Herald without attending a press conference. I really find them to be, by and large, pretty worthless as a means of information gathering. And so, I mean, it's an important question because of the controversy that has happened this year. It's become more important, but it is also kind of funny to me because, I mean, if we're doing our jobs correctly, like Matt said, we're not going to be at very many press conferences.
One of the beauties of the model of being uncoupled from the daily news cycle and having to feed the World Herald or USA Today is you can decide your own cadence and not make up your own stories, but kind of define your own playing field. We, Spotlight PA out of Harrisburg, created something called the $100,000 Club. And this was a look at those Pennsylvania legislators who have spent more than $100,000 on their expense account during COVID. This is for travel, for those meals out that you just had to have during lockdown. And there were 16 legislators from both sides of the aisle. And this was widely published as a transparency effort. And literally all 70 of the newspapers in the network that we feed picked it up, every single one.
I love it.
So the editor said, I think we got their attention. And it wasn't a gotcha. It was just very straightforward, all public data. But because of the decline of local news in Pennsylvania, no one had looked at it. So that's the kind of thing I'm expecting from you all. And the notion of calling it the $100,000 Club is kind of an example of that, the well-told part of your tagline, because in a way it's not enough to do important work. You have to package it graphically to that question and kind of textually in an appealing way to get people to read it.
Yeah. Kind of to dovetail off that point, one of the things that we are aware, we are content agnostic is the term that I use. Look, Matthew and I know the written word best, but I also have a background in data and building websites out of public information. That's part of our mission. Video, podcasts, all of these are on the table. We realize there's more than one way to tell any story, and some of them really succeed best in other metrics. So we are casting a wide net for who is going to fill these roles and how we're going to do this work. And all we know for sure is that it will change over time.
Any other thoughts, ideas, questions? We can wrap up. And again, I'm involved in this because I think this makes sense to our small state, and I think it can really make an impact, and I think informed citizens participate more in self-government. I believe in the words on the Capitol, the salvation of the state is in the watchfulness of its citizens. I hope, and I think probably everybody on this call does too. So keep in touch with us. We want your feedback, and you can find out more. Go to the NebraskaJournalismTrust.org And we accept your best wishes and support in any fashion you choose to give it. So we'll wrap up for today. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Nathalie. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.